The film begins in a vast, expansive desert that seems to stretch endlessly in all directions. In this immense landscape, there appears to be nothing but golden sand, scattered rocks, and the blazing, scorching sun beating down from above. Amid this desolate and barren land, an infant is spotted. This tiny child seems to be engaged in the act of eating an organ of some kind, creating an unsettling image against the background of the harsh wilderness. As the scene unfolds, we are introduced to our main character, a dedicated photographer named Wyndham Stone. Wyndham is deeply passionate about his work and has come to this remote and desolate location for a very specific reason. He wants to take stunning pictures of a rare celestial event, a total solar eclipse. These breathtaking eclipses are not something that occurs frequently, and Wyndham's determined to capture the perfect shot that will immortalize this extraordinary moment. With a sense of purpose, he wanders off the main path, searching for the ideal spot where he can set up his camera and other photography equipment. Wyndham meticulously prepares everything, adjusting his camera and ensuring that it is positioned just right, all to capture the eclipse at the precise moment it begins. After the solar eclipse has come to an end, Wyndham feels that it is time for him to leave the desert and return to his car. However, just as he is about to depart, something completely unexpected happens. He spots a child, all alone and crying in the middle of the vast desert. The sight of a child in such a lonely and perilous place is truly distressing for Wyndham. He scans the surroundings, hoping to see the child's parents nearby, but there is no one else in sight. The child explains in a small and trembling voice that he is lost in the desert and is searching for his parents. Hearing this heartbreaking story, Wyndham realizes that he cannot simply leave the child all alone in such a dangerous situation. He feels a strong sense of responsibility and decides that he must help the lost child find a safe place. However, the child suddenly gets up and begins to walk in the opposite direction. Wyndham, wanting to assist, tells him that his car is in a different direction, but the child continues to walk forward, insisting that Wyndham follow him. The child leads Wyndham on a long and winding journey, taking him far away from where he had parked his car. During this trek, the child asks Wyndham for water, and being the good-hearted person he is, Wyndham generously shares his water supply with him. However, the child shows no gratitude and instead runs away, smiling playfully, leaving Wyndham feeling puzzled and confused about the strange encounter. As the sun begins to set, Wyndham realizes that it is getting late, and he finds himself far from his car without any clear way to return before darkness falls. He tries to retrace his steps, but the desert is vast and unyielding, and soon the light of day disappears completely. With no choice left, Wyndham must accept the reality that he is stuck in the desert for the night. He searches for a place to take shelter and finds a large rock under which he can protect himself from the cold and the encroaching darkness. As he settles in for the night, enveloped in the eerie silence of the desert, Wyndham suddenly hears a faint noise in the distance. This sound is a small sign of life in what feels like an otherwise lifeless and barren environment. Filled with curiosity and a flicker of hope, he decides to follow the sound until he discovers its source, a hidden pit in the ground. The pit appears to lead to an underground house. With a mix of worry and hope swirling in his mind, Wyndham cautiously climbs down into the pit using a ladder. When he reaches the bottom and approaches the door, he knocks, hoping that someone will answer and help him. However, there is no response, and the silence around him becomes almost eerie. Undeterred, Wyndham decides to enter the underground space. Inside, he finds a woman who is busy cooking. Remarkably, she does not seem surprised or bothered at all by Wyndham's sudden presence in her home. Instead, she continues with her cooking, paying him little attention. Feeling quite anxious and concerned, Wyndham explains to the woman that he is lost and needs to use a phone to call for help. Instead of responding to his request, the woman, whose name is Alina, silently offers him some food to eat. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Wyndham shares the entire story of his misadventures, the child who deceived him, the astonishing beauty of the eclipse, and all the troubles he has faced since then. After listening to Wyndham's narrative, Alina finally speaks. She tells him in a calm but firm tone that it is getting late and that he must sleep now. Although Wyndham insists that he might just go back outside, Alina's demeanor suggests that he should stay. With not much else to say, Wyndham reluctantly agrees and settles into the strange silence of the underground house. As the night progresses, Alina prepares for bed and begins to clean herself with a towel, all while not wearing any clothes. Wyndham notices her naked body body, but he remains silent and goes to sleep without making a sound, respecting her privacy. The next morning, Wyndham awakens to find that Alina is still fast asleep. He decides that it is time for him to leave the underground house, so he leaves some money on the table as a way to thank her for her unexpected hospitality. Stepping outside, he takes a moment to relieve himself while surveying the area around him. Suddenly, he makes a troubling discovery. The ladder he had used to climb down into the pit is now gone. He is surrounded by tall, hot mountains, and there is no clear way for him to escape. Realizing that he has no choice but to wait for Alina to wake up, Wyndham takes this opportunity to explore his surroundings and begins taking pictures of the fascinating sketches he sees on the wall of the underground house. Soon, Alina wakes up and Wyndham hears her making noises in the backyard. He quickly approaches her and asks where the ladder is, but she replies that she does not know its whereabouts and that sometimes people bring it back when they choose to do so. Puzzled by her response, Wyndham questions whether other people are living in this hidden place. However, Alina remains silent, adding to the mysterious atmosphere of the situation. With no other options available to him, Wyndham decides to stay and wait for the ladder to return. The day passes, but the ladder does not make an appearance. Determined not to give up, Wyndham attempts to climb the surrounding mountains, but the intense heat and rough terrain make it nearly impossible for him to succeed. Eventually, he has to accept that he will spend another night in the underground house with Alina. Later on, Alina approaches Wyndham and offers to wash his clothes. Initially hesitant, Wyndham ultimately accepts her offer and hands her his shirt. The following morning, Wyndham wakes up once again to find that the ladder is still missing. Desperate to escape his current predicament, he takes a piece of cloth and a hammer from Alina's house, hoping to fashion a way to climb out. He manages to get almost to the top when all of a sudden, unseen individuals throw a dead animal head down at him. The shocking incident causes Wyndham to lose his grip, and he falls back to the ground, hitting it hard. The impact knocks him out cold, and he remains unconscious for the rest of the day. When night falls, he regains consciousness, only to discover that the hammer has pierced through his leg, causing him unbearable pain. His screams echo in the darkness, bringing Alina to his side. She quickly instructs him to stay still, and gently removes the hammer from his leg, wrapping his injury with a makeshift bandage that she has crafted herself. Now, due to his injury, and the bizarre situation he finds himself in, Wyndham has no choice but to remain in Alina's underground house until he can heal. His future becomes entwined with this mysterious desert and the peculiar people who inhabit it. That same night, we catch a glimpse of Alina as she marks the wall with blood from her pants, adding another layer of intrigue to the unfolding story. A couple of days later, Wyndham's frustration grows as he realizes that the ladder he desperately needs to escape is still nowhere to be found. Feeling hopeless and trapped, he shouts for help, hoping that someone might hear him. In a fit of anger, he storms into the house, grabs Alina, and drags her outside. Confused and desperate, he demands to know who she is and what she wants from him. Alina appears frightened by Wyndham's aggressive questions, but she tries to calm him down, offering to take care of him and provide him with food. However, Wyndham does not want food. He longs to return to his normal life outside of this strange situation. As Alina continues to try to comfort him, Wyndham pulls away, rejecting her help. Just then, a group of boys appears, having heard his earlier cries for assistance. Wyndham is filled with joy at the sight of them and eagerly asks them to call the police for help. But the boys insist that he only needs a rope to get out of the pit, meaning that there is no need to involve the police. The boys agreed to help Wyndham, and with a sense of relief, they left, promising that they would return soon. Wyndham felt a hopeful spark igniting within him once again, feeling that perhaps he would finally be rescued from this predicament. But before they departed, they turned to him with curious expressions and asked him what his favorite color was. Without hesitation, Wyndham replied, "Red." After a while, the boys came back, and in their hands, they carried the rope Wyndham had been anxiously waiting for. With excitement, they instructed him to tie the rope around himself securely, which he did with great focus and care, making sure it was fastened tightly. However, one of the boys mumbled something under his breath, suggesting that Wyndham should have chosen blue as his favorite color instead. This careless comment made Wyndham feel a bit uneasy, as he wondered what it might mean for his situation and what his fate would hold. Finally, after making sure the rope was secured, Wyndham prepared himself to be pulled up. Yet, instead of the expected action of being lifted towards safety, the boys suddenly went silent. To his growing alarm, nobody was pulling him up. Instead, they left him suspended in mid-air, dangling helplessly. Panic set in as Wyndham called out for them, his voice echoing in the vastness of the desert, but his screams seemed to vanish into the air, unheard and unanswered. Exhausted from the ordeal and under the harsh glare of the sun, he eventually fell asleep, his body succumbing to the fatigue. It wasn't long before he was jolted awake by an unexpected sensation. One of the boys was urinating on him. The boy continued to relieve himself without a care, and the others, filled with a sense of mischief, started swinging Wyndham back and forth like a rag doll, teasing him as he dangled helplessly in the air. Wyndham pleaded with them to stop, his voice filled with desperation, but they ignored his cries completely. They continued to mock him, speaking in languages that he could not understand, their words sounding primitive and savage. The boy's laughter echoed around him, making the entire experience feel even more humiliating. Eventually, as they swung him around, Wyndham's body hit the rough side of the mountain with a painful thud, and he was knocked out once again, succumbing to darkness. When Wyndham regained consciousness, he found himself back in Alina's bed, as though nothing had changed at all. Confused and weak, he attempted to get up and leave, but the pain from his injuries was too severe, causing him to collapse back down onto the bed. Alina, who had been a constant presence during all of his struggles, approached him with concern in her eyes. He looked up at her and asked her who those boys were, and she told him that they were astray, wandering around because the desert had brought them together. She insisted that they were just bored boys who engaged in foolish and reckless activities. Curious about how she had communicated with them, Wyndham asked her in what language she spoke to the boys. Alina replied that she used the language spoken by the people in this area. Despite her calm demeanor, she was firm in her insistence that he needed to rest and come to terms with the situation. She told him that he now belonged in this place. She explained that escaping from here was not going to be easy, and that he could come into the house whenever he felt ready. With that, she left him to think. The next morning, Wyndham woke up to find another day stretching ahead of him in the same place. Initially, he resisted the idea of being trapped in this strange environment, but as time passed, he began to accept the reality that escaping was not as simple as he had once thought. He started to listen to Alina more, even though she didn't speak much. However, her actions showed him that she genuinely cared for him. She cooked meals for him, washed his clothes, and tended to his needs. At night, she even offered him a spare t-shirt so that his own clothes could dry, an act that brought them closer together in an awkward but meaningful way. In those moments, Wyndham realized that his fate was now intertwined with the strange desert and the mysterious people who inhabited it. As time went on, Wyndham began to cultivate a small garden in an enclosed area. He found solace in coaxing life from the dry, arid soil, nurturing the plants as they started to grow. Surprisingly, the same boys who had once trapped him in the desert and played cruel tricks on him began bringing him supplies that he needed regularly, perhaps feeling a strange sense of camaraderie or guilt over their previous actions. Alina, in turn, continued to care for Wyndham with nurturing diligence. She prepared chicken for him, laundered his garments, and attended to the many tasks that came with their isolated existence in the desert. As he settled into this unusual routine, Wyndham found comfort in the small things, like the warmth of the sun and the feel of the earth beneath his fingers. Even though he seemed to be adapting to life in the desert, deep down, he still yearned for freedom. One particular night, after they had received some alcohol with their supplies, Wyndham drank more than he usually would. Perhaps he was trying to forget his longing to leave, or perhaps he simply wanted to drown his worries in the drink. As the alcohol took hold, his thoughts became muddled, and he felt a sudden and intense connection to Alina, unlike anything he had experienced before. The following day, Wyndham still found himself yearning to discover a way out of the desolate desert and away from the unpredictable people who surrounded him. However, despite his efforts, he still couldn't find a means to escape. Just when he was feeling particularly low and defeated, a glimmer of hope arrived in the form of a boy who approached him with an idea. The boy expressed a desire to learn and asked Wyndham if he could teach him. Wyndham recognized this as an opportunity to do something good and meaningful, so he told him he'll teach him everything he knew, but they have to find a way out of here first, and then they can start learning together like a family. The boy hesitated for a moment, his expression contemplative. He admitted he didn't know if he could really help him get out of here. He can only try to assist when his friends aren't around or when they are sleeping, but he promises he will do what he can. As Wyndham and the boy were engaged in their conversation, one of the boy's friends suddenly appeared and caught them talking. In an instant, the boy was swiftly taken away, and the small chance of help that Wyndham had felt was snatched away from him just as quickly. When Wyndham returned to where Alina was, he was met with news that would change their lives forever. Alina revealed that she was expecting a baby. Learning that Alina was going to have a baby filled Wyndham with worry and anxiety, disturbing the fragile peace they had found in their unusual relationship. Time, which had once felt like a relentless enemy, now seemed to stretch on endlessly because the boy who had promised to help him had not returned. One eerie night, strange singing sounds echoed from higher up in the desert, sending chills down Wyndham's spine. The sounds seemed to foretell something ominous, and Alina, her voice trembling with fear, informed Wyndham that the boys were performing an ancient and mysterious ceremony. As dawn broke, instead of feeling relieved, they were met with the heart-wrenching sight of Alina crying sorrowfully. Concerned, Wyndham stepped outside their home and was met with a horrific scene. The boy who had once given him hope now lay dead, hanging lifelessly against the bare side of the mountain. He had perished as a result of the intense and wild ceremony he had been part of. Witnessing this tragic sight, Alina fell into deep sorrow, crying out in despair in the empty expanse around them. She turned to Wyndham with a face twisted in anguish and blamed him for causing her child's death. In a fit of rage and pain, she grabbed a piece of wood and struck Wyndham with such force that he was rendered unable to move. Then, in a moment of desperation, she locked him in a cage, leaving him confined there for 9 long and difficult months. During this time, Alina provided him with just enough food to keep him alive, which he consumed eagerly, desperate to survive. As time passed in the desolate desert, Wyndham began to feel a flicker of hope when a young girl unexpectedly found him in his sad and unfortunate situation. She was visibly shocked and taken aback when she saw Wyndham trapped inside a cold metal cage. The sight of him, confined and helpless, stirred something within her. With desperation in his voice, Wyndham begged her to help him escape from this terrible nightmare that he had been living for what felt like an eternity. He longed for freedom and a return to a normal life, away from the pain and suffering that had become his daily reality. The girl, after hearing his pleas, left to find help for him. However, things took a horrifying turn that Wyndham could never have anticipated. The boy who had originally put Wyndham in the cage encountered her, and then something truly terrifying happened. She was killed right in front of Wyndham. This shocking event made Wyndham fully realize just how dire and dangerous his situation truly was. The beautiful desert, which at first glance seemed like a picturesque landscape, was a treacherous place filled with suffering and despair for him. It felt as though he would never be able to escape from this hellish existence. As the days dragged on, they began to blur together for Wyndham, who remained locked in his cage. He spent his time staring at the old paintings on the cave walls, which depicted scenes of a tribe that had once lived there. These images told stories of a time long gone, and they served as a reminder of the life that existed before his own suffering began. As the time for Alina to give birth drew closer, Wyndham felt a growing sense of urgency. He approached her and asked her to let him out of the cage, insisting that he could help her when the time came for her to deliver the baby. However, Alina, confident in her own abilities and past experiences, firmly refused his request. She told him that she could handle the situation on her own because she had done it before. This rejection only deepened Wyndham's feelings of desperation and hopelessness. He pleaded with her, begging her to free him from this cage, from this nightmare. If she cannot do that, then to at least end his suffering. But his heartfelt pleas fell on deaf ears as Alina left him once again, and his words faded away. After some time had passed, Alina returned to Wyndham looking very worried and distressed. She quickly unlocked his cage and urgently asked for his help, explaining that she was in a really bad situation. Even though Wyndham was hesitant and still felt weak from being locked up for so long, he knew it was his duty to help her. So with great effort, he left the cage to assist her. Being confined for such an extended period had made Wyndham weak. His muscles were stiff and unaccustomed to movement, making it difficult for him to walk properly. On that day, as he looked around, he noticed a ladder that he could have used to escape from this dreadful place. It stood there, almost beckoning him to climb it and find freedom. However, despite the temptation, Wyndham chose not to take the opportunity to flee. It was as if the ladder was quietly asking asking him to escape, but he decided to do the right thing and help Alina when she needed him the most instead of running away to save himself. While Alina was giving birth, she welcomed a baby girl into the world. They shared a moment of happiness, feeling grateful for this special occasion, especially after all the trouble they had faced together. However, this happiness was short-lived. The boys who had kept Wyndham trapped in the cage soon came down with serious and threatening attitudes. In a shocking and brutal act, they quickly cut Wyndham's throat, ending his life in a cruel and senseless manner. His blood soaked into the dry ground where he had been trapped, a stark reminder of the harsh realities of the desert. Wyndham's lifeless body was left outside, exposed to the elements, illustrating just how tough and unforgiving the desert can be. His story ended not with a triumphant escape, but with the heartbreaking truth that he had died, leaving behind a legacy of suffering and despair in a place that had once seemed so beautiful. The desert, with its vastness and allure, had ultimately become a graveyard for his hopes and dreams, marking the end of his journey in a tragic and sorrowful manner. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.